The holy water hadn't even dried on little Emma's forehead when my mother-in-law stood up in the middle of the church and declared that my daughter wasn't her son's child. What happened next would change our family forever. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I should have known something was wrong the moment Patricia walked into Sacred Heart Church that Sunday morning. My mother-in-law had this particular way of carrying herself when she was about to cause a scene. Chin held high, lips pressed into that thin line that made her look like she'd swallowed something bitter, and her eyes scanning the room like a hawk searching for prey. But I was too caught up in the magic of the moment to pay attention to her warning signs. After all, this was Emma's baptism day. My beautiful 3-month-old daughter was finally going to be welcomed into our church community, surrounded by family and friends who loved her. I had spent weeks planning every detail, from the delicate white christening gown that had been in my family for 3 generations to the small reception we'd organized in the church hall afterward. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I thought I had everything figured out. At 28, I was happily married to David Thompson, a kind-hearted man I'd met during our college years at Northwestern University. We'd been together for 6 years, married for 3, and Emma was the missing piece that completed our little family puzzle. David worked as a software engineer at a tech company downtown, while I had just returned from maternity leave to my job as a high school English teacher. Everything seemed perfect on the surface. But I had learned over the past few years that Patricia Thompson had a talent for finding cracks in that surface and prying them wide open. The problems with my mother-in-law had started almost immediately after David and I got engaged. At first, it was subtle comments about my background, how different our families were, how she wasn't sure I understood their traditions. Patricia came from old money, the kind of Chicago family that had their name on hospital wings and attended charity galas where a single plate cost more than most people's monthly rent. My family, on the other hand, were hardworking Mexican Americans who ran a small but successful construction business on the South Side. David always defended me, but I could see how torn he was between his loyalty to his wife and his desire to keep peace with his mother. Patricia was a master manipulator, the type of woman who could deliver the cruelest insult with a sweet smile and then act shocked when you took offense. She had perfected the art of plausible deniability. Every cutting remark could be explained away as a misunderstanding or a concern for her son's happiness. When I got pregnant with Emma, Patricia's behavior escalated. She questioned everything from my prenatal care choices to whether I was eating the right foods. She insisted on accompanying us to doctor's appointments, despite my obvious discomfort. During my baby shower, she made pointed comments about how the baby might not look like David, since genetics can be so unpredictable with mixed heritage. I tried to brush off her comments, but they stung more than I cared to admit. David's father had passed away when he was 15, leaving Patricia to raise him alone. She'd poured all her protective instincts and controlling tendencies into her relationship with her only child, and my presence in David's life represented a threat to that dynamic. The morning of the baptism, Patricia arrived at our house earlier than expected. David was still getting ready upstairs, and I was in the kitchen, carefully packing the diaper bag with everything we'd need for the day. Emma was sleeping peacefully in her car seat, already dressed in the family christening gown that my grandmother had worn, then my mother, then me. "Good morning, Patricia," I said, trying to keep my voice cheerful, despite the knot of anxiety that always formed in my stomach when she was around. She barely acknowledged my greeting, instead walking straight to Emma's car seat and staring down at my sleeping daughter with an expression I couldn't quite read. "She doesn't look much like David, does she?" Patricia said, finally, her voice carrying that deceptively casual tone that I'd learned to fear. I felt my jaw clench involuntarily. "She's only 3 months old, Patricia. Babies change so much in their first year." She replied, still studying Emma's face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "I was just thinking about how David looked at that age. He had such distinctive features, even as an infant. The Thompson chin, and those blue eyes. They were apparent from day one." Emma had inherited my dark eyes and hair, along with the olive complexion that came from my Mexican heritage. She was beautiful, perfect in every way, but she didn't look like the stereotypical Thompson baby that Patricia had apparently been expecting. David appeared in the kitchen just as the tension was becoming unbearable. "Morning, Mom," he said, giving Patricia a quick kiss on the cheek before coming over to wrap his arms around me from behind. "Ready for our little angel's big day?" The drive to Sacred Heart Church should have been filled with excitement and anticipation. Instead, it was marked by an uncomfortable silence, punctuated only by Patricia's occasional sighs from the back seat. David tried to fill the quiet with cheerful commentary about the beautiful weather and how proud he was of our daughter, but even his natural optimism seemed strained. Sacred Heart was the church where David had been baptized 30 years earlier, where his parents had been married, and where his father's funeral had been held. It held deep significance for the Thompson family, and despite my complicated feelings about Patricia, I was honored that Emma would be welcomed into this community that meant so much to her father. Father Martinez, no relation despite the shared surname, was a warm elderly priest who had known David since he was a boy. He greeted our family with genuine affection, taking Emma gently in his arms and cooing over her sweet demeanor. The church was filled with about 40 guests: David's colleagues, our mutual friends, my family members who had driven in from different parts of Illinois, and a handful of Patricia's society friends who looked like they'd rather be at a country club brunch. My parents, Carlos and Maria Martinez, had arrived early and were sitting in the front pew on the left side of the church. They looked proud but slightly out of place among Patricia's well-dressed friends, despite wearing their finest clothes. My father kept adjusting his tie nervously, while my mother clutched her purse with both hands, the way she did when she felt uncertain about a situation. David's best friend from college, Michael Chen, served as Emma's godfather, while my sister Sophia had agreed to be her godmother. They stood with us at the altar as Father Martinez began the ceremony, speaking about the significance of baptism and the commitment we were making to raise Emma in faith and love. The first part of the ceremony went smoothly. Emma slept peacefully through most of it, occasionally stirring, but never fully waking up. Father Martinez spoke about the responsibility of parenthood, about the community's role in supporting a child's spiritual growth, and about the joy that comes from welcoming a new soul into the family of faith. When it came time for the actual baptism, I felt tears welling up in my eyes. This was one of those moments that you know you'll remember for the rest of your life, watching your child take this symbolic first step in their spiritual journey, surrounded by people who love them. David squeezed my hand, and I could see that his eyes were misty too. Father Martinez held Emma over the baptismal font, and she opened her eyes for the first time during the ceremony, looking around with that unfocused but alert expression that babies get when they're trying to process new surroundings. "Emma Rose Thompson," Father Martinez said clearly, "I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." The holy water trickled over Emma's forehead, and she made a small sound of surprise but didn't cry. It was perfect, exactly the peaceful, meaningful ceremony I had envisioned. David and I exchanged a look of pure happiness, and I felt like my heart might burst from the overwhelming love I felt for our little family. That's when everything went wrong. As Father Martinez was blessing Emma and preparing to hand her back to us, I heard the sound of someone standing up abruptly behind us. The church pews creaked, and there was a rustling of fabric that seemed unnaturally loud in the sacred quiet of the moment. "I'm sorry, Father, but I have to speak up." Patricia's voice cut through the silence like a blade. I turned around, still holding my arms out to receive Emma, and saw my mother-in-law standing in the front pew with an expression of grim determination on her face. Father Martinez looked confused, still cradling Emma in his arms. "Mrs. Thompson, is everything all right?" The church had fallen completely silent. 40 pairs of eyes were fixed on Patricia, waiting to see what could possibly be so urgent that it couldn't wait until after the ceremony. David looked frozen, his face pale with what I could only assume was mortification. "I'm afraid I can't, in good conscience, watch this child be baptized under false pretenses," Patricia announced, her voice carrying clearly through the acoustics of the old church. "That baby is not my son's child." The words hung in the air like poison. Every person in that sacred space seemed to have stopped breathing simultaneously, creating a vacuum of shocked silence that pressed against my eardrums. Father Martinez's weathered face went through a rapid succession of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a deep sadness that comes from witnessing something that shouldn't happen in God's house. "Patricia, what are you doing?" David's voice cracked as he spoke, barely audible throughout the church. But his mother wasn't finished. She stepped out of the pew and into the aisle, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor with each deliberate step. "I've done my research, Father. I've been watching, comparing, analyzing. Look at that child. Really look at her. Does she have even one feature that resembles my son? One characteristic that suggests Thompson blood?" I found my voice finally, though it came out shakier than I wanted. "Patricia, you're out of line. This is Emma's baptism and you're—" A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "I'm protecting my family," she interrupted, turning those cold blue eyes on me with an intensity that made me take a step backward. "I'm protecting my son from a lie that's been eating away at him, whether he admits it or not." David moved then, positioning himself between his mother and me like a shield. "Mom, stop this. Right now. You're embarrassing yourself and humiliating my wife on what should be the happiest day." "Am I wrong, David?" The question came out quietly, but it cut through his protest like a scalpel. "Deep in your heart, haven't you wondered? Haven't you looked at that baby and asked yourself why she doesn't look like you? Why doesn't she look like anyone else in our family?" The horrible thing was the pause, that split second of silence before David answered, that microscopic hesitation that told me his mother's poisonous words had found their target. It lasted maybe half a second, but in that moment, I felt something crack inside my chest. "Of course she's mine," David said, but his voice lacked the immediate conviction that should have accompanied such a declaration. "Rebecca is my wife. Emma is our daughter. That's the end of this conversation." Patricia smiled then, a cold, satisfied expression that told me she'd gotten exactly the reaction she was hoping for. Is it, though? Because I think we both know there are ways to be certain, scientific ways, and until you have that certainty, this baptism is a mockery of everything this church stands for. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around at the faces staring back at us. David's co-workers, our college friends, my family members who had driven hours to be here, Patricia's society friends, who were probably already composing the gossip they'd spread at their next luncheon. Everyone was frozen, trapped in this moment of public family destruction. Father Martinez cleared his throat softly. He said, with the diplomatic skill of someone accustomed to delicate situations, "Perhaps this would be better discussed in private. The church hall is available if you need." "There's nothing to discuss," I said, finding strength in my anger. My voice was louder now, carrying across the church with surprising force. "Patricia has made her accusation public, so let me be equally clear in my response. Emma is David's daughter. She was conceived during our marriage, born into our love, and she belongs to both of us. If you can't accept that, then you don't belong at her baptism." A murmur ran through the congregation, some approving, some shocked at the confrontation escalating. I could see my sister Sophia gripping Michael's arm, both of them looking like they wanted to intervene but weren't sure how. Patricia's laugh was like breaking glass. "How noble of you, Rebecca! How perfectly rehearsed! But actions speak louder than words, don't they? If you're so certain, so confident in your claims, then you won't mind proving it." "I don't need to prove anything to you. You're not Emma's parent. You're not her doctor. You're just a bitter woman who can't stand the fact that your son has built a life that doesn't revolve around you." The accusation hit its mark. Patricia's composure cracked for just a moment, revealing the raw anger underneath her polished exterior. "How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth?" I was on a roll now, months of suppressed frustration pouring out in front of God and 40 witnesses. "You've been undermining our marriage since day one. You've questioned every decision I've made as a mother, criticized every choice David and I have made together, and now you're trying to destroy our family on the day we're celebrating our daughter's entrance into the church community."
David was looking between his mother and me like he was watching a tennis match, his face growing paler with each exchange. I could see the internal war playing out in his expressions, loyalty to his wife, battling against a lifetime of conditioning to defer to his mother's judgment. If Rebecca has nothing to hide, Patricia continued, addressing her son directly now, then she'll welcome the opportunity to put these questions to rest once and for all. A simple DNA test, David. One test, and we can all move forward with absolute certainty. Mom, David said weakly, this isn't the place. When is the place, David? When will it ever be the right time to ask the hard questions? When Emma's 5 and you're still wondering? When she's 10 and the doubts have eaten away at your marriage? When she's 18 and you realize you've spent her entire childhood living a lie? I watched my husband's face crumble under the weight of his mother's words. The doubt she'd planted was taking root, growing with each passing second of his silence. This was her masterstroke. Not just to accuse me publicly, but to make David complicit in the accusation by his failure to immediately and completely shut it down. Fine, I said, the word coming out harder and sharper than I intended. Fine, you want a DNA test? You'll get your DNA test. The congregation erupted into whispers and murmurs. Father Martinez looked like he was aging by the minute. David's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise that I was agreeing to Patricia's demands. Rebecca, you don't have to, David started. No, I think I do, I cut him off, my gaze fixed on Patricia's triumphant expression. Because apparently my word isn't enough. My husband's trust isn't enough. The fact that Emma was conceived during our marriage, born in a hospital with both of our names on the birth certificate, isn't enough. So yes, Patricia, let's get your test. Let's put this ugly suspicion to rest once and for all. Patricia's smile widened. Excellent. I've already researched the best facilities in Chicago. We can have results within 48 hours. The fact that she'd already researched testing facilities told me everything I needed to know about how long she'd been planning this ambush. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst driven by emotion. It was a calculated attack, timed for maximum impact and public humiliation. But, I continued, my voice growing stronger as a plan began forming in my mind, when those results come back proving that Emma is David's daughter, you will publicly apologize. Here, in this church, in front of these same people you've just humiliated us in front of, you will admit that you were wrong, that you let your prejudices and your need to control David cloud your judgment, and you will beg our forgiveness. Patricia's smile faltered slightly. She clearly hadn't expected me to turn her demand into a challenge with consequences for her.
You won't be, I said simply. But if by some impossible chance you are, then David and I will deal with that privately, as a family should, not as a public spectacle for your entertainment. Father Martinez had been holding Emma this entire time, and the poor baby had finally started to fuss, sensing the tension and raised voices around her. Her soft cries seemed to break through the spell of anger and accusation that had gripped the church. Perhaps, the priest said gently, we should postpone the remainder of the ceremony until your family has had time to resolve these concerns. I looked at Emma, red-faced and crying in the arms of a confused priest, and felt my heart break all over again. This was supposed to be her special day, the day she was welcomed into our faith community with love and joy. Instead, it had become a battlefield where her paternity was being questioned by her own grandmother. No, I said firmly, absolutely not. Patricia has said her piece, she's made her demands, and I've agreed to them. But Emma's baptism continues as planned. She is an innocent baby who deserves to be welcomed into this church family regardless of the poisonous accusations being thrown around. I stepped forward and took Emma from Father Martinez's arms, holding her close to my chest until her crying began to subside. If Patricia can't behave appropriately at her granddaughter's baptism, then she's welcome to leave. But this ceremony will not be ruined by her paranoia and manipulations. David finally seemed to find his spine. Mom, he said, his voice firmer than it had been all morning, Rebecca's right. Whatever questions you have, whatever tests you think need to be done, can happen later. Today is about Emma, and if you can't respect that,
then you need to go." Patricia looked genuinely surprised by her son's ultimatum. For a moment, I thought she might actually leave, might storm out of the church in a dramatic huff that would give us some peace to finish the ceremony. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and walked back to her pew with as much dignity as she could muster. "Very well," she said coldly. "I'll stay for the baptism. But this conversation is far from over." As she sat down, the church remained heavy with tension, but Father Martinez gamely attempted to restore some semblance of sanctity to the proceedings. He spoke about forgiveness, about the importance of family unity, about giving children the gift of faith and love rather than discord and suspicion. But the damage was done. Emma's baptism would forever be remembered not as a joyous celebration, but as the day her grandmother publicly questioned her legitimacy in front of our entire community. The reception in the church hall felt like a wake. Despite my determination to salvage what remained of Emma's special day, the atmosphere was suffocating with unspoken questions and sideways glances. People clustered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones while casting nervous looks toward our family table, where David sat staring at his untouched plate of catered sandwiches. My parents had positioned themselves like protective sentinels on either side of me, my mother holding Emma, while my father kept his weathered construction worker's hands clasped tightly in front of him, a clear sign that he was fighting the urge to have some very direct words with Patricia. My sister Sophia moved through the room like a diplomat, trying to engage our guests in normal conversation about anything other than what just transpired. Patricia, meanwhile, held court at a table with her society friends, speaking in that perfectly modulated voice that somehow managed to convey both victim and victor simultaneously. I caught fragments of her words as they carried across the room. "Concern for my son, protecting the family name. Sometimes the truth is painful." "Mija," my mother whispered in Spanish, her voice thick with suppressed emotion. "We can leave now if you want. Take Emma home away from this toxicity." I looked around the room at the faces of people who had come to celebrate with us. David's college roommate who had driven up from St. Louis, my former teaching colleagues who had used their Sunday to be here, our neighbors who barely knew us but had accepted our invitation with genuine warmth. These were good people caught in the crossfire of Patricia's vendetta. "No," I said, replying in Spanish. "If we run now, she wins. Everyone here will remember Emma's baptism as the day her mother fled in shame, rather than the day a beautiful little girl was welcomed into our church family." David finally looked up from his plate. "What are you two talking about?" Before I could answer, Michael Chen approached our table with his wife Jennifer, both of them wearing expressions of concerned confusion. "Hey," Michael said carefully, settling into the chair across from David. "So that was, intense. Are you guys okay?" David let out a bitter laugh. "Are we okay? My mother just accused my wife of adultery in front of our entire church congregation on our daughter's baptism day. I'm not sure okay covers it." Jennifer reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Rebecca, I hope you know that no one here believes. Some of them do. I can see it in their faces. Patricia planted seeds of doubt, and some of those seeds are already taking root." It was true. While many of our guests seemed genuinely shocked and sympathetic, others were clearly processing Patricia's accusations with uncomfortable consideration. I had caught more than one person studying Emma's features with new scrutiny, comparing her olive skin and dark eyes to David's fair complexion and light hair. Mrs. Henderson down the street had actually approached me earlier with what she probably thought was support. "You know, dear," she said in a conspiratorial whisper, "babies can surprise you with how they develop. My nephew looked nothing like his father for the first 2 years, and now you'd swear they were twins." The implication that Emma might eventually develop features that would prove her paternity was both well-intentioned and devastating. "The test will prove everything," David said, though his voice lacked conviction.
Mom will have to eat her words in front of everyone. I studied my husband's face carefully. The doubt was there, small but growing, like a crack in a foundation that would eventually compromise the entire structure. Patricia had known exactly what she was doing when she planted those seeds in such a public forum. It wasn't enough for her to question Emma's paternity privately. She needed the weight of community judgment to pressure David into questioning everything he thought he knew about his family.
David, I said quietly, do you want to talk about this? Really talk about it? He looked up sharply. What's there to talk about? Emma's my daughter. You're my wife. Mom's way out of line, and when the test results come back, she'll have to acknowledge that. That's not what I'm asking. I kept my voice low, aware that even our closest friends were probably straining to overhear our conversation. I'm asking if you have doubts, if Patricia's accusations have made you question what you know to be true. The pause was longer this time. David's eyes flickered across Emma's sleeping face, taking in the features that so clearly reflected my heritage rather than his. When he finally answered, his voice was barely audible. I hate that she's made me think about it at all. The honesty was both painful and necessary. At least now we were dealing with the real issue, not just Patricia's public attack, but the private damage her words had inflicted on David's confidence in our marriage and family. But thinking about it and believing it are two different things, I said carefully. So let me ask you directly. Do you believe Emma is your daughter? Yes, he said immediately, then paused. I mean, logically, yes. We were together when she was conceived. You've never given me any reason to doubt your faithfulness. The timeline adds up perfectly. Logically, I repeated. What about emotionally? What about when you look at her and see my eyes instead of yours? What about when people comment on how much she looks like my side of the family? David rubbed his face with both hands. I don't know, Rebecca. I wish I could say it doesn't matter, but it does. Not because I don't trust you, but because she doesn't look like me at all. And Mom's right about one thing. I did look like a Thompson baby from day one. There are pictures. This was the conversation I'd been dreading, but knowing we'd need to have eventually. Patricia's public accusation had simply forced it into the open sooner than either of us was ready. Genetics are complicated, I said, falling back on the rational explanations I'd researched during my own moments of worry. Babies can inherit different combinations of traits. Sometimes recessive genes skip generations. Sometimes babies look like their father's side, and sometimes they don't. David finished. I know all the scientific explanations, Rebecca, but knowing them doesn't make the doubt go away completely. My father, who had been silently observing our conversation while pretending to focus on his coffee, finally spoke up. David, you want to know what I see when I look at Emma? David turned toward him with surprise. My father wasn't typically one for philosophical discussions, preferring to express his thoughts through actions rather than words. I see a baby who stops crying when she hears your voice. I see a little girl who follows you with her eyes when you move around the room. I see a child who belongs to you in every way that matters, regardless of whose nose she has or whose eyes she inherited. Carlos is right, my mother added softly. Biology is just one part of being a family. Love, commitment, shared experiences, these things matter more than DNA. David nodded slowly, but I could see that while he appreciated my parents' support, it wasn't enough to quiet the questions Patricia had raised. The doubt was too deep now, too publicly aired to be easily dismissed with wise words about the nature of family bonds. Patricia chose that moment to approach our table. She walked over with the measured steps of someone who had carefully planned her next move, her society friends trailing behind her like an entourage of perfectly coiffed witnesses. David, she said, her voice carrying just enough warmth to sound maternal while maintaining an undertone of steel, I think we should discuss the arrangements for the testing. I've contacted Gene Labs downtown. They have an excellent reputation and can provide results within 48 hours. The casual way she mentioned having already contacted a testing facility confirmed what I'd suspected earlier. This had all been premeditated. Patricia had come to the baptism with every intention of creating this scene and forcing this confrontation. Mom,
David started, but she held up a manicured hand to stop him. I know you're upset with me right now, and I understand why, but someday when you have clarity about this situation, you'll thank me for having the courage to ask the difficult questions. Anger surged through me like electricity. Courage? You call ambushing us at our daughter's baptism courageous? You call publicly humiliating your son's family in front of our church community brave? I call it necessary, Patricia replied coolly. Sometimes truth requires uncomfortable conversations. Truth? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You don't know anything about the truth, Patricia. Truth is what happens between a husband and wife in the privacy of their marriage. Truth is what happens when two people love each other enough to build a family together. Truth is not standing up in a church and making accusations based on your own prejudices and insecurities. Prejudices? Is that what you think this is about? Isn't it? I shot back. From the moment David and I got engaged, you've been looking for reasons why I'm not good enough for your son. My background, my family, my heritage, nothing about me has ever met your standards. And now that we have a beautiful daughter who happens to look like my side of the family instead of yours, you've decided that's proof of some grand deception? This isn't about your heritage. Of course it is. The words came out louder than I intended, and I noticed that the other conversations in the room had stopped. Once again, we had an audience for our family drama. You've been dropping hints about Emma's appearance since the day she was born. Comments about how different she looks, how genetics can be unpredictable with mixed heritage, how she doesn't have Thompson features. Did you think I wasn't listening? Patricia drew herself up to her full height, which was considerable even without the 3-inch heels she favored. I think that my concerns are valid regardless of your interpretation of my motivations. And I think the fact that you're so defensive about a simple test suggests that perhaps you're not as confident as you claim to be.
That was her trump card. The suggestion that my anger and defensiveness were actually proof of guilt rather than righteous indignation. It was a masterful manipulation, the kind of twisted logic that made victims appear guilty for the crime of defending themselves. But I was done playing her games. Fine, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. Schedule your test, Patricia. Get your proof. But understand this. When those results come back showing that Emma is David's daughter, this relationship is over. You will not be welcome in our home. You will not have unsupervised access to our daughter. And you will spend the rest of your life knowing that you chose suspicion over love, accusation over trust, and manipulation over family unity. The silence that followed my ultimatum was profound. Even Patricia seemed momentarily stunned by the finality in my voice. The Gene Labs facility on Michigan Avenue looked more like a high-end medical spa than a DNA testing center. Sleek marble floors, minimalist furniture, and soft lighting created an atmosphere of clinical luxury that somehow made the whole ordeal feel even more surreal. Patricia had spared no expense in selecting the most prestigious testing facility in Chicago, as if the quality of the marble countertops might somehow influence the accuracy of the results. We'd arrived separately, David and I in our Honda Civic, Patricia in her gleaming black Mercedes. The symbolic distance felt appropriate, though I noticed David kept glancing toward the parking lot where his mother's car sat like a shark wading in dark water. The past 2 days since the baptism had been a special kind of torture. Word had spread through our social circles with the efficiency of wildfire, despite our friend's best efforts at discretion. David's coworkers were suddenly awkward around him, not knowing whether to offer support or pretend ignorance about the situation. My teaching colleagues had rallied around me with fierce loyalty, but their very defensiveness confirmed that the gossip had reached even the halls of Jefferson High School. Emma, blissfully unaware of the chaos swirling around her parentage, had been the only source of normalcy in our household. She continued her routine of feeding, sleeping, and offering those heart-melting smiles that made everything else fade into insignificance. Watching David with her during those 2 days had been both reassuring and heartbreaking.
His love for her was undeniable, but I could see him studying her features with a new intensity that hadn't been there before. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson?" A lab technician in pristine scrubs appeared from behind the reception desk. "We're ready for you now." The testing process itself was surprisingly quick and simple. Cheek swabs for David and Emma, a few forms to sign, and a promise of results within 48 hours. The technician, a professional woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, explained the process with clinical detachment, seemingly unaware that she was handling the nuclear weapon that might destroy our family. "The test we're conducting will determine paternity with 99.9% accuracy," Dr. Kim explained as she carefully labeled the samples. "We'll be analyzing 24 genetic markers to establish or exclude biological relationship between the potential father and child." Patricia had positioned herself in a chair near the window, watching the proceedings with the satisfied expression of someone who believed they were about to be vindicated. She had barely spoken to either of us since arriving, maintaining an air of wounded dignity that suggested she saw herself as the victim in this situation. "How long before we know?" David asked, his voice strained. "Results will be available Wednesday afternoon. We'll call with preliminary results, and you can pick up the official documentation at your convenience." Wednesday afternoon. 48 hours to live in the limbo between accusation and resolution, between trust and betrayal, between the family we'd built and the wreckage Patricia seemed determined to create. As we left the lab, Patricia finally spoke. "David, perhaps you and Emma should stay at my house until the results come in, just to avoid any awkwardness." The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. She was trying to separate David from me during the most vulnerable time in our marriage, positioning herself as his ally, while I became the suspicious outsider awaiting judgment. "Absolutely not," I said before David could respond. "Emma stays with me. Period." "I'm not trying to keep Emma from you," Patricia replied with false reasonableness. "I'm simply thinking that David might want some space to process. David can think for himself, and he can decide for himself where he wants to stay while we wait for your vindication or your humiliation." David looked between his mother and me like a man watching his two possible futures diverge before his eyes. "He's staying home with my family," he said finally, though his voice lacked the conviction I was hoping for. The drive home was silent except for Emma's occasional babbling from her car seat. David's hands gripped the steering wheel with unnecessary force, his knuckles white against the black leather. I found myself studying his profile, trying to read the thoughts behind his tense expression. "Say what you're thinking," I said finally as we pulled into our driveway. "I don't know what I'm thinking," he admitted. "I feel like I'm losing my mind. Part of me knows this is all ridiculous, that Mom has gone too far and needs to apologize, but another part of you wonders if she might be right." He turned off the engine, but made no move to get out of the car. I hate that she's made me doubt something I should be certain about. I hate that when I look at Emma now, I'm analyzing her features instead of just enjoying her. I hate that our neighbors are probably gossiping about whether my daughter is really mine. "Our daughter," I corrected gently. "Right, our daughter." But the correction felt hollow, like he was reciting words he wasn't sure he believed anymore. That evening, David's phone rang constantly. News of the DNA test had somehow leaked, probably through one of Patricia's society friends, and suddenly everyone had an opinion about our situation. His college buddies called, offering support and disbelief. His work colleagues reached out with awkward messages of solidarity. Even his high school girlfriend, someone he hadn't spoken to in years, sent a Facebook message expressing her shock that anyone would question his integrity.
That was her trump card, the suggestion that my anger and defensiveness were actually proof of guilt rather than righteous indignation. It was a masterful manipulation, the kind of twisted logic that made victims appear guilty for the crime of defending themselves. But I was done playing her games. "Fine," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "Schedule your test, Patricia. Get your proof. But understand this. When those results come back showing that Emma is David's daughter, this relationship is over. You will not be welcome in our home. You will not have unsupervised access to our daughter, and you will spend the rest of your life knowing that you chose suspicion over love, accusation over trust, and manipulation over family unity. The silence that followed my ultimatum was profound. Even Patricia seemed momentarily stunned by the finality in my voice. The Gene Labs facility on Michigan Avenue looked more like a high-end medical spa than a DNA testing center. Sleek marble floors, minimalist furniture, and soft lighting created an atmosphere of clinical luxury that somehow made the whole ordeal feel even more surreal. Patricia had spared no expense in selecting the most prestigious testing facility in Chicago, as if the quality of the marble countertops might somehow influence the accuracy of the results. We'd arrived separately, David and I in our Honda Civic, Patricia in her gleaming black Mercedes. The symbolic distance felt appropriate, though I noticed David kept glancing toward the parking lot where his mother's car sat like a shark, waiting in dark water. The past 2 days since the baptism had been a special kind of torture. Word had spread through our social circles with the efficiency of wildfire, despite our friend's best efforts at discretion. David's coworkers were suddenly awkward around him, not knowing whether to offer support or pretend ignorance about the situation. My teaching colleagues had rallied around me with fierce loyalty, but their very defensiveness confirmed that the gossip had reached even the halls of Jefferson High School. Emma, blissfully unaware of the chaos swirling around her parentage, had been the only source of normalcy in our household. She continued her routine of feeding, sleeping, and offering those heart-melting smiles that made everything else fade into insignificance. Watching David with her during those 2 days had been both reassuring and heartbreaking. His love for her was undeniable, but I could see him studying her features with a new intensity that hadn't been there before. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, a lab technician in pristine scrubs, appeared from behind the reception desk. "We're ready for you now." The testing process itself was surprisingly quick and simple. Cheek swabs for David and Emma, a few forms to sign, and a promise of results within 48 hours. The technician, a professional woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, explained the process with clinical detachment, seemingly unaware that she was handling the nuclear weapon that might destroy our family. "The test we're conducting will determine paternity with 99.9% accuracy," Dr. Kim explained, as she carefully labeled the samples. "We'll be analyzing 24 genetic markers to establish or exclude biological relationship between the potential father and child." Patricia had positioned herself in a chair near the window, watching the proceedings with the satisfied expression of someone who believed they were about to be vindicated. She had barely spoken to either of us since arriving, maintaining an air of wounded dignity that suggested she saw herself as the victim in the situation. "How long before we know?" David asked, his voice strained. "Results will be available Wednesday afternoon," Dr. Kim replied. "We'll call with preliminary results, and you can pick up the official documentation at your convenience." Wednesday afternoon. 48 hours to live in the limbo between accusation and resolution, between trust and betrayal, between the family we'd built and the wreckage Patricia seemed determined to create. As we left the lab, Patricia finally spoke. "David, perhaps you and Emma should stay at my house until the results come in, just to avoid any awkwardness." The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. She was trying to separate David from me during the most vulnerable time in our marriage, positioning herself as his ally while I became the suspicious outsider awaiting judgment. "Absolutely not," I said before David could respond. "Emma stays with me, period." "I'm not trying to keep Emma from you," Patricia replied with false reasonableness. "I'm simply thinking that David might want some space to process. David can think for himself. And he can decide where he wants to stay while we wait for your vindication or your humiliation." David looked between his mother and me like a man watching his two possible futures diverge before his eyes. "I'm staying home with my family," he said finally, though his voice lacked the conviction I was hoping for. The drive home was silent except for Emma's occasional babbling from her car seat. David's hands gripped the steering wheel with unnecessary force, his knuckles white against the black leather. I found myself studying his profile, trying to read the thoughts behind his tense expression. "Say what you're thinking," I said finally as we pulled into our driveway. "I don't know what I'm thinking," he admitted. "I feel like I'm losing my mind. Part of me knows this is all ridiculous, that Mom has gone too far and needs to apologize. But another part of you wonders if she might be right?"
He turned off the engine but made no move to get out of the car. I hate that she's made me doubt something I should be certain about. I hate that when I look at Emma now, I'm analyzing her features instead of just enjoying her. I hate that her neighbors are probably gossiping about whether my daughter is really mine. Our daughter, I corrected gently. Right, our daughter. But the correction felt hollow, like he was reciting words he wasn't sure he believed anymore. That evening, David's phone rang constantly. News of the DNA test had somehow leaked, probably through one of Patricia's society friends, and suddenly everyone had an opinion about our situation. His college buddies called, offering support and disbelief. His work colleagues reached out with awkward messages of solidarity. Even his high school girlfriend, someone he hadn't spoken to in years, sent a Facebook message expressing her shock that anyone would question his integrity.
Each call, each message, each expression of support seemed to chip away at David's composure rather than strengthen it. By the time we went to bed that night, he looked like a man carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations along with his own doubts. "What if she's right?" he whispered in the darkness of our bedroom, the words barely audible but hitting me like thunder. I turned to face him, though I could only make out his silhouette in the dim light filtering through our curtains. "Then we'll deal with it together. But David, she's not right. I know she's not right because I know what happened in our marriage, in our bedroom, in our life. Emma was conceived here, in our home, during our marriage by two people who love each other." I know that logically, but logic and doubt don't always exist in the same space. I reached for his hand in the darkness. "What do you need from me right now? What can I do to help you get through this?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe just be patient with me while I work through this. I don't want to doubt you. I don't want to question our family. But Mom put something in my head and I can't just will it away." The next day brought a new kind of torture. Tuesday crawled by with excruciating slowness, each hour feeling like a week as we waited for Wednesday's phone call. David went to work but came home early, claiming he couldn't concentrate. I had taken the week off from teaching, using personal days I'd been saving for family emergencies. This certainly qualified. Patricia called twice, both times asking to speak with David about practical matters that needed to be discussed before the results came in. I answered both calls and politely but firmly told her that David would speak with her after we had the test results, not before. The second call escalated into something approaching an argument. "Rebecca, you're being unreasonable," Patricia said, her mask of civility slipping. "I'm not the enemy here. I'm trying to protect my son from a potentially devastating situation." "You created the devastating situation. You took a happy family celebrating their daughter's baptism and turned it into a circus of suspicion and doubt. And now you want to manage the aftermath like you're some kind of crisis counselor instead of the person who caused the crisis. If there's nothing to hide, then there's nothing to fear from my involvement. There's everything to fear from your involvement, Patricia. You've already proven that you're willing to destroy relationships to satisfy your suspicions. Why would I trust you to be reasonable now?" She hung up on me, which I took as a small victory. Wednesday morning arrived with Chicago's typical November gloom. Gray skies, bitter wind, and the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. David had barely slept, tossing and turning beside me until I finally gave up on rest around 5 a.m. and went to make coffee. I found him in Emma's nursery, sitting in the rocking chair we'd carefully selected during my pregnancy, holding our daughter while she slept. The sight of them together, his large hands cradling her tiny form, his face soft with the love that transcended all the doubt and confusion of the past few days, nearly brought me to tears. "She's so perfect," he whispered without looking up. "Whatever happens today, she's perfect." "She's yours, David. I know that sounds impossible to believe right now, but she's yours in every way that matters." He finally looked up at me, and I could see the exhaustion and stress written in the lines around his eyes. What if the test says she's not? It was the first time he'd voiced that possibility directly, and hearing it spoken aloud made my stomach clench with fear. Not fear that the test would be negative. I knew with absolute certainty that Emma was David's daughter, but fear that the doubt Patricia had planted had grown so large that it might survive even positive results. "Then we figure out how that's possible,"
I said carefully. Because I know the truth, David. I know when Emma was conceived, and I know who her father is. If a test says otherwise, then there's something wrong with the test, not with our family. The phone rang at 2:47 p.m. I knew the exact time because I'd been watching the clock obsessively, willing the hands to move faster, while simultaneously dreading the moment they reached their destination. David answered on the second ring, his voice tight with anxiety. Hello? I could hear the muffled voice of Dr. Kim on the other end, but couldn't make out the words. David's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, surprise, and then something that looked like relief mixed with another emotion I couldn't identify. Yes, I understand, he said finally. Thank you for calling. We'll be in this afternoon to pick up the documentation. He hung up the phone and turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. Well? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. 99.9% probability that I am Emma's biological father, David said slowly, as though he was still processing the information. No doubt, no ambiguity, she's mine. The relief that flooded through me was so intense that my knees actually buckled. I sank into the nearest chair, suddenly understanding how much tension I'd been carrying, despite my certainty about the results. Thank God, I whispered. Thank God. But when I looked up at David, expecting to see joy or relief or vindication, I saw something more complex. There was relief there, yes, but also something that looked almost like disappointment. And in that moment, I realized that some part of him had been hoping for a different answer. Not because he wanted Emma not to be his daughter, but because he'd wanted a simple explanation for the doubt that had been eating at him. The silence that followed David's announcement stretched between us like a chasm. He stood there holding the phone, staring at it, as though the device itself might offer some explanation for the complicated emotions playing across his face. I wanted to celebrate, to feel vindicated, to call everyone who had supported us and share the news that Patricia was wrong, publicly and spectacularly wrong. Instead, I found myself studying my husband's expression and realizing that positive test results weren't going to magically repair the damage that had been done to our marriage. We need to call your mother, I said finally, though the words tasted bitter in my mouth. David nodded slowly but made no move toward the phone. I know, I need a minute to process this. What's there to process? The test proves what we've known all along. Emma is your daughter. Patricia was wrong, publicly and spectacularly wrong, and now she owes us an apology. It's not that simple anymore, Rebecca. David sat down heavily on our couch, the phone still clutched in his hand. The test result doesn't erase the past week. It doesn't undo the doubt she planted and the questions I've been asking myself.
I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November weather outside. What questions? Questions about why I doubted you in the first place. Questions about what kind of man lets his mother convince him to question his wife's fidelity. Questions about whether I'm strong enough to protect our family from this kind of manipulation. The conversation I'd been dreading was finally happening. Patricia's attack hadn't just been aimed at me. It had been designed to undermine David's confidence in himself as a husband and father. Even with proof of his paternity, he was left questioning his own judgment and loyalty. David, I said gently, settling beside him on the couch, your mother is a master manipulator. She's had 30 years to perfect her techniques on you. The fact that her poisonous words found their target doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Does it? Because a stronger man would have shut her down immediately. A better husband would have never let those doubts take root, regardless of what his mother said. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my sister, Sophia. Patricia just posted on Facebook about trusting but verifying in family matters. What's going on? My blood pressure spiked as I opened Facebook and navigated to Patricia's profile. Sure enough, there was a post from 20 minutes earlier, right around the time Dr. Kim would have been making her calls. Sometimes the most difficult conversations are the most necessary ones. Family requires both love and truth, trust and verification. I'm grateful for modern science that allows us to remove doubt and build relationships on solid foundations. #family first, #truth, #blessed.
The post had already garnered a dozen likes and several comments from her society friends, all offering support for her wisdom and courage. She was spinning the narrative before we'd even had a chance to process the results ourselves. She posted on Facebook, I said, showing David the screen. She's already trying to control the story. David read the post twice, his jaw tightening with each word. She's making it sound like the test was her idea, and she's vindicated by the results. She doesn't even know the results yet. Unless, the realization hit me like a physical blow, unless Dr. Kim called her too. David was already dialing the lab's number. After a brief conversation with the receptionist, he confirmed my suspicion. She's listed as an interested party on the paperwork. They called her immediately after they called us. This meant Patricia knew the results for 20 minutes before posting her carefully crafted message. She had time to process the information, craft her response, and begin damage control before we'd even finished our conversation about what the results meant for our marriage. We need to go over there, I said, standing up with sudden determination, right now, before she has time to spin this any further. Rebecca, maybe we should... No. My voice came out sharper than I intended. I'm done letting your mother control the narrative of our lives. She demanded this test, she got her results, and now she's going to face the consequences of her actions. David looked uncertain, but he didn't argue. We gathered Emma and her diaper bag, and within 15 minutes, we were driving toward Patricia's Lincoln Park mansion. The neighborhood was the kind of old money enclave where the houses sat behind wrought iron gates and mature oak trees, where every lawn looked like it belonged in a magazine and every driveway hosted cars that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Patricia's house was a 3-story Victorian that had been in the Thompson family for 4 generations. David had grown up in those rooms, played in that perfectly manicured garden, learned his mother's expectations for achievement and social standing within those elegant walls. Walking up to the front door felt like approaching a fortress where the enemy knew all our weaknesses. Patricia answered the door before we could knock, as if she'd been watching for us from the front window. She was dressed impeccably as always, a cashmere sweater set in pale blue, pearls at her throat, her silver hair styled in the kind of sophisticated bob that required weekly salon visits. "David, Rebecca," she said with the cool politeness reserved for unwelcome guests, "I assume you're here about the test results. We're here about your Facebook post and your complete lack of acknowledgement that you were wrong," I replied, not bothering with politenesses. Was I wrong, though? Patricia stepped aside to let us enter, but her tone suggested she wasn't conceding anything. The test confirmed what needed to be confirmed. Emma is David's daughter, and now we can all move forward with certainty. The audacity of her response left me momentarily speechless. She was treating the positive results as vindication of her methods rather than proof of her error in judgment. "You accused me of adultery," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm, in front of our entire church congregation on our daughter's baptism day. "You humiliated our family based on nothing but your own prejudices and suspicions." "I raised legitimate questions that needed answers," Patricia replied smoothly. "Sometimes truth requires uncomfortable conversations." David finally found his voice. "Mom, you were wrong. The test proves you were wrong. Rebecca deserves an apology. Our family deserves an apology. And you need to acknowledge that your legitimate questions were actually unfounded accusations." Patricia's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "I was protecting you, David. I was ensuring that you weren't building your life on a lie. Would you rather have lived with doubt forever than have certainty?"
"I would rather have trusted my wife," David said quietly. "I would rather have believed in the family we built together than have listened to suspicions based on nothing but appearances and prejudice." "Prejudice?" Patricia's voice took on a dangerous edge. "Is that what you think this was about?" "Wasn't it?" I stepped forward, no longer caring about maintaining civility. "From the moment David and I got engaged, you've been looking for reasons to disapprove of me, my background, my family, my heritage. Nothing about me has ever been good enough for your son. And when Emma was born looking like my side of the family instead of yours, you saw an opportunity to prove that I was exactly the kind of person you'd always suspected I was." "That's absolutely—" "Let me finish,"
I interrupted. You spent months dropping hints about Emma's appearance, making comments about unpredictable genetics with mixed heritage, questioning every aspect of my pregnancy and delivery. You were building a case, Patricia, collecting evidence to support a conclusion you'd already reached. Patricia drew herself up to her full height, every inch the society matron defending her territory. I was concerned about my son's happiness and my family's integrity. If that makes me the villain in your narrative, so be it. It makes you wrong, David said firmly. And it makes you destructive. You didn't just question Emma's paternity. You damaged my marriage, humiliated my wife, and turned our daughter's baptism into a public spectacle of accusation and doubt. And now you have certainty, Patricia replied, as if that justified everything that had happened. Now you can move forward without questions, without doubts, without the kind of wondering that destroys marriages from within. I realized then that she genuinely believed she'd done us a favor. In her mind, forcing the DNA test had been an act of love rather than aggression, protection rather than destruction. She couldn't see or refused to acknowledge the damage her methods had caused. The wondering that destroys marriages, I said slowly, is the wondering you created. David never doubted Emma's paternity until you planted those seeds. Our marriage was solid until you decided to attack its foundation. Was it, though? Patricia's smile was sharp as a blade. Because it seems to me that if your marriage was truly solid, a few questions wouldn't have been enough to shake it. The cruelty of that statement hit both David and me simultaneously. She was blaming us for the damage she had caused, suggesting that our vulnerability to her manipulation was evidence of pre-existing problems rather than the natural result of her calculated attack. "Get out," David said quietly. "Excuse me?" "Get out of our lives." His voice was gaining strength with each word. "You've shown us exactly who you are, Mom. You've demonstrated that your need to control and manipulate is more important to you than our happiness or Emma's well-being, so get out." Patricia's facade finally crumbled completely, revealing the rage that had been simmering beneath her polished exterior. "You're choosing her over your own mother after everything I've done for you, everything I've sacrificed?" "I'm choosing my family," David replied. "The family I built with the woman I love, the family you tried to destroy because it didn't meet your expectations or fit your vision of what my life should look like." "You'll regret this decision," Patricia said, her voice cold with fury. "When this marriage falls apart, and it will fall apart because doubt has a way of lingering even after tests provide answers, you'll remember this conversation. You'll remember that I tried to protect you from heartbreak. The only heartbreak here," I said, "is watching a grandmother choose pride over love, control over family, and suspicion over trust. Emma will grow up knowing that her paternal grandmother cared more about being right than about being kind." We left then, walking out of that elegant house with Emma in my arms and David's hand firmly clasped in mine. But as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that Patricia's final words carried the weight of prophecy rather than mere spite. The damage was done, even if the truth had been revealed. Doubt, once planted, has deep roots that don't disappear simply because a lab report proves them unfounded. David's hesitation when answering questions about Emma's paternity, his analysis of her features instead of simply enjoying her presence, the way he studied our marriage for cracks that Patricia had suggested might be there, these were scars that would take time to heal, if they healed at all. That evening, as I watched David give Emma her bottle, I found myself wondering if we would ever fully recover from Patricia's assault on our family. The test had proven Emma's paternity, but it hadn't erased the doubt from David's eyes or restored the easy trust that had once defined our marriage. Some victories, I was learning, feel remarkably similar to defeats. 3 months after the DNA test results, I found myself sitting in Dr. Jennifer Walsh's office, staring at the diplomas on her wall while trying to find words for feelings I didn't fully understand. The family therapy sessions had become a weekly ritual that both David and I dreaded and desperately needed. Some weeks we made breakthrough progress. Other weeks we seemed to circle the same painful territory without resolution. "Rebecca," Dr. Walsh said gently, "you mentioned that David has been distant lately, even though the test results vindicated you. Can you help me understand what that distance looks like?" I glanced at David, who was sitting in the chair beside me, but felt miles away. His body language had become a study of careful politeness, present but protected, engaged but guarded. The easy intimacy that once defined our marriage now felt forced, like we were both performing the roles of loving spouses without quite feeling the emotions behind them. I feel like living with a stranger who looks exactly like my husband. He's kind, he's helpful with Emma, he goes through all the motions of being a devoted father and husband, but there's this wall between us that wasn't there before.
David, Dr. Walsh said, you're punishing yourself for being human. Your mother spent 30 years perfecting her ability to manipulate your emotions and perceptions. The fact that she succeeded doesn't make you weak, it makes you normal. But a stronger man would have what? Been immune to psychological manipulation from the person who raised him? David, you're applying impossible standards to yourself and then using your failure to meet those standards as evidence that you don't deserve Rebecca's trust. Dr. Walsh had a gift for cutting through the circular logic that kept us trapped in patterns of guilt and defensiveness. But knowing she was right didn't automatically heal the emotional distance that had grown between David and me. The real question, Dr. Walsh continued, is whether you're willing to do the work of rebuilding trust, not just in your marriage, but in yourself. Rebecca can forgive you for doubting her, but you need to forgive yourself for being manipulated. The sessions were helping, but the progress felt achingly slow. Meanwhile, life continued around our emotional repairs. Emma was growing and changing daily, developing new skills and personality traits that delighted us both. She'd started crawling, which meant our house was suddenly full of baby gates and outlet covers. She'd also started saying mama and dada with increasing clarity, though she seemed to use both words interchangeably for anyone who paid attention to her. Work provided some normalcy. I'd returned to teaching full-time, and my students offered a welcome distraction from the complexity of family therapy and marriage rebuilding. High school seniors were dealing with their own dramas, college applications, relationship troubles, family expectations. That put my problems in perspective while still allowing me to feel useful and competent. David threw himself into a new project at his tech company, spending long hours debugging code and designing systems that behaved predictably according to logical rules. I suspected that the order and rationality of programming provided relief from the messy emotional work we were doing at home. Patricia, meanwhile, had essentially disappeared from our lives. After David's ultimatum, she'd made no attempt to contact us directly. Mutual friends occasionally mentioned seeing her at social events, where she apparently maintained her usual composed demeanor while deflecting questions about her son and granddaughter with practiced skill. Maybe that's for the best, my mother said during one of our weekly phone calls. Sometimes people need to face consequences for their actions, Mija. She hurt your family badly. A little loneliness might teach her something about the value of what she lost. But David struggled with the complete separation from his mother. Despite everything she'd done, she was still the woman who'd raised him, who'd sacrificed to give him opportunities, who'd been his primary family for most of his life. The conflicting emotions of love, anger, disappointment, and guilt created another layer of complexity in our healing process. I keep thinking about calling her, David admitted during one of our therapy sessions. Not to reconcile exactly, but to, I don't know, check on her, make sure she's okay. What would that accomplish? Dr. Walsh asked. And what would it cost? You emotionally? I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. That's what makes it so hard. Dr. Walsh leaned forward slightly. David, you're allowed to grieve the loss of the mother you wished you had while still protecting yourself from the mother you actually have. Those aren't contradictory emotions. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Chicago in snow by mid-November. Emma experienced her first snowfall with the wonder of someone discovering magic, pressing her face against our living room window and babbling excitedly at the white flakes drifting past. David and I bundled her up in a tiny snowsuit and took her outside, where she stared at the falling snow with such serious concentration that we both burst into laughter. It was moments like these that reminded me why we were fighting so hard to repair our marriage. Despite the emotional distance and the ongoing work of rebuilding trust, we were still a family. We still had the capacity to create joy together, to share wonder at our daughter's discoveries, to function as a unit even when individual healing was incomplete, but the good moments also highlighted the absence of easy intimacy between David and me. We could co-parent effectively, share domestic responsibilities, and even enjoy each other's company. What we couldn't seem to recapture was the spontaneous affection, the comfortable silences, the sense of being completely known and accepted by another person. "It's like we're dating again," I told Sophia during one of our sister lunches. Polite, careful, trying to make a good impression instead of just being ourselves. "Maybe that's not entirely bad," Sophia suggested. "Maybe you need to record each other, rediscover what you love about each other without the assumption that those feelings are permanent or guaranteed." The idea had merit, but it also felt exhausting. I wanted to skip the awkward getting to know you again phase and return to the comfortable partnership we'd built over 6 years together. I wanted David to trust his feelings for me and my commitment to our family without constantly questioning and analyzing every interaction. Christmas approached with the kind of family logistics that normally would have included discussions about visiting Patricia. This year, we made plans that pointedly excluded her: Christmas Eve with my parents, Christmas morning at home with just our small family, Christmas dinner with Sophia and her husband. "Do you think she's spending Christmas alone?" David asked. On Christmas Eve as we were driving to my parents' house. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "Does it matter?" "It shouldn't matter. But it does." This was David's ongoing struggle, intellectually understanding that Patricia's isolation was a consequence of her own choices while emotionally feeling responsible for her loneliness. Dr. Walsh had warned us that this guilt might intensify during holidays and family milestones, when the absence of extended family becomes more pronounced. Christmas morning brought a surprise that highlighted how much our family dynamic had changed. Among the gifts under our tree was a small package with no return address, wrapped in elegant paper that I immediately recognized as Patricia's preferred style. Inside was a silver baby rattle engraved with Emma's name and birthdate, along with a note written in Patricia's precise handwriting: "For Emma, with love from her grandmother. I hope someday you'll understand that love sometimes requires difficult choices, and that the most important thing I could give you is parents who put your well-being above all else." David stared at the note for a long time, his emotions playing across his face like weather patterns. "She's trying to rewrite history," he said finally, "making it sound like everything she did was for Emma's benefit. Or maybe she's trying to find a way to live with what she did," I suggested. "People need narratives that let them see themselves as something other than the villain." "Does it matter what narrative she tells herself if she's not part of our lives anymore?" "I don't know. Does it matter to you?" These questions without clear answers had become the hallmark of our new normal. The black and white certainties of our pre-crisis life had been replaced by shades of gray that required constant navigation and interpretation. Emma's first word, clearly spoken and unmistakably intentional, was "up," delivered while reaching toward David with the imperious demand of a tiny person who knew exactly what she wanted. The moment of pure joy on David's face as he scooped her into his arms reminded me of who we'd been before Patricia's manipulation had clouded everything with doubt and second-guessing. "She knows exactly who her daddy is," I said, and for the first time in months, David's smile reached his eyes completely. "Yeah," he said, spinning Emma around until she giggled with delight. "She does." New Year's Eve found us at home, having declined invitations to various parties in favor of a quiet evening with Emma. As midnight approached, we sat on our couch watching the ball drop on television while Emma slept peacefully in her bouncy seat nearby. "What are you hoping for this year?" David asked as the countdown began on screen. "Healing," I said without hesitation. "For all of us. Even Patricia, in whatever way makes sense for her." "Do you really mean that? About Patricia?" I considered the question seriously. "I mean that I hope she finds peace with her choices and learns to live with the consequences. I hope she gets help for whatever drives her need to control other people's lives. I don't wish her suffering, even though she caused us plenty." The clock struck midnight, and David leaned over to kiss me. It was gentle, tentative, but it carried more genuine emotion than our interactions had held in months. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know I've been distant, and I know we have more work to do, but I need you to know that I love you and Emma more than anything else in this world." "I love you too," I replied. "All of you, including the parts that are still healing." As we carried a sleeping Emma to her crib and prepared for bed ourselves, I felt something shift between us. Not a complete restoration of what we'd lost, but a tentative step toward what we might build in its place. Recovery, I was learning, wasn't about returning to a previous state of happiness, but about creating new patterns of trust and intimacy that could withstand future challenges. The new year stretched ahead of us, full of possibilities for continued healing, deeper understanding, and the gradual reconstruction of a marriage that had been tested but not broken. Patricia's attack on our family had ended, but our response to that attack was still being written, day by day, choice by choice, in the small moments of grace and forgiveness that define real love. 2 years after the baptism that changed everything. I stood in my kitchen watching David teach Emma how to crack eggs for Sunday morning pancakes. At 18 months old, she was more interested in squishing the shells between her fingers than actually helping with breakfast, but David's patience was infinite as he guided her tiny hands and narrated each step of the process. "Gentle, sweetheart," he said, steadying her wobbly grip on an egg. "We want to crack it, not demolish it." Emma responded with a string of babbled commentary that sounded remarkably like she was arguing with his technique. Her personality had emerged as a delightful combination of fierce independence and infectious joy, traits that served her well as she navigated the world with the fearless curiosity of a toddler who knew she was deeply loved. The phone rang, interrupting our peaceful morning routine. David glanced at the caller ID and froze, his hand suspended over the answer button. "It's Mom," he said quietly. "We'd had no contact with Patricia for over a year. After the Christmas gift with its accompanying note, she'd respected David's boundary about staying out of our lives. Mutual friends occasionally provided updates. She'd joined a book club, started volunteering at a literacy program, seemed to be building a social life that didn't revolve around controlling her son's choices." "Answer it," I said, surprising myself with the calm certainty in my voice. "It's time." David looked at me questioningly, but pressed the answer button. "Hello, Mom." The conversation was brief and formal. Patricia was calling to ask if she could see Emma on her second birthday, which was still 6 weeks away. She wasn't demanding or manipulative, simply requesting the opportunity to be part of her granddaughter's celebration if we were willing to consider it. "I need to discuss this with Rebecca," David told her. "I'll call you back." After he hung up, we sat at our kitchen table while Emma played with her plastic measuring cups on the floor nearby. The silence stretched between us as we both processed the unexpected contact and what it might mean for our carefully reconstructed family peace. "What do you think?" David asked finally. I think," I said slowly, "that we're strong enough now to set terms instead of just reacting to whatever she decides to do." The past 2 years had indeed made us stronger. Our marriage had survived the crisis and emerged more intentional, more protective of our bond, more aware of the importance of choosing each other actively rather than assuming our connection was immune to outside interference. We'd learned to create boundaries that protected our family without isolating us from the possibility of forgiveness and growth. Dr. Walsh had warned us that recovery wasn't a linear process, that we might face setbacks, challenges, and moments when old wounds felt fresh again. But she'd also helped us develop tools for navigating those difficulties without letting them derail our progress. "If we decide to see her," I continued, "it has to be on our terms. Our house, our rules, our timeline. And if she shows any signs of reverting to her old behavior, she leaves immediately." David nodded slowly. "I think I'd like Emma to know her grandmother, if Patricia can be the kind of grandmother Emma deserves." We decided to invite Patricia to Emma's birthday party, but with clear conditions. The celebration would be at our house with our chosen guest list. She could bring a gift, but it couldn't be extravagant or designed to overshadow other presents. She would participate as a guest, not as the host trying to control the event. And most importantly, any criticism of our parenting choices or attempts to undermine our authority would result in her immediate departure. When Patricia arrived on Emma's birthday, she looked different. Her usual armor of designer clothing had been replaced by a simple dress and comfortable shoes. She carried a modest gift, a children's book about families, and her entire demeanor seemed gentler, less calculated than I remembered. "Thank you for including me," she said simply, her eyes filling with tears as she watched Emma toddle around the backyard chasing soap bubbles. The afternoon unfolded with surprising ease. Patricia followed Emma's lead, getting down on the grass to examine interesting rocks, pushing her gently on the swing set, reading the birthday book she'd brought with genuine enthusiasm for the story rather than performance for the adults watching. When Emma scraped her knee on the sidewalk and ran crying to me for comfort, Patricia didn't intervene or offer unsolicited advice about proper first aid. She simply watched as I cleaned the scrape, applied a colorful bandage, and distracted Emma with silly songs until the tears stopped. "You're a wonderful mother," Patricia said quietly as I was cleaning up the first aid supplies. "I should have told you that years ago, instead of looking for reasons to criticize." The apology was simple and direct, without the elaborate justifications or qualifications that had characterized her previous attempts at accountability. It felt genuine in a way that allowed me to accept it without reservation or suspicion. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Patricia approached David and me with obvious nervousness. "I was wondering," she said carefully, "if it might be possible to see Emma occasionally. Not to interfere or advise, just to be part of her life in whatever way you think is appropriate. David and I exchanged glances, having anticipated this request and discussed our response in advance. We'd be open to supervised visits, David said. Once a month, here at our house, for a few hours. We'll see how it goes and adjust from there. Patricia's relief was visible. Thank you. I know I don't deserve this chance, but I'm grateful for it. Over the following months, those monthly visits became a new normal that surprised everyone involved. Patricia seemed genuinely committed to being the grandmother Emma needed rather than the matriarch she'd always imagined herself to be. She played tea party with plastic cups, read board books with enthusiasm, and celebrated Emma's achievements without trying to claim credit for them. The change wasn't just superficial. During one visit, Emma had a typical toddler meltdown about having to share her toys with a visiting cousin. Instead of offering advice or criticism about our handling of the situation, Patricia quietly moved to the kitchen and began loading our dishwasher, giving us space to parent our daughter without audience or commentary. She really has changed, David said one evening after Patricia had left following a particularly pleasant afternoon. I keep waiting for the old patterns to resurface, but they don't seem to be there anymore.
People can change, I replied. It's rare, and it requires tremendous effort, but it's possible. Dr. Walsh had prepared us for the possibility that Patricia's transformation might be genuine, while also helping us maintain healthy skepticism and strong boundaries. The monthly visits allowed us to observe her behavior over time without becoming vulnerable to manipulation or control. As Emma's second birthday approached, we faced a decision about whether to expand Patricia's role in our lives. She'd proven herself capable of respecting boundaries, supporting our parenting choices, and prioritizing Emma's well-being over her own need for control. I think, David said one night as we watched Emma sleeping peacefully in her crib, that we can trust her with more time. Not because I'm sure she'll never revert to old patterns, but because we're strong enough now to handle it if she does. That strength was perhaps the most valuable thing we'd gained from our journey through crisis and recovery. We'd learned that love alone wasn't enough to protect a family, that real protection came from wisdom, boundaries, clear communication, and the willingness to choose each other's well-being over keeping peace with difficult people. Emma would grow up knowing that her parents had fought for their marriage, that her grandmother had learned to choose love over control, and that families could survive even devastating betrayals if the people involved were willing to do the hard work of healing and change. On the second anniversary of that terrible baptism day, we returned to Sacred Heart Church for Sunday morning service. Father Martinez welcomed us with the warm smile of someone who'd witnessed our family's journey from crisis to healing. After the service, he pulled us aside. "I've been thinking about your family often," he said, "about how you turned destruction into reconstruction, how you chose forgiveness without sacrificing your principles. That's the kind of faith that changes the world." As we drove home with Emma chattering happily in her car seat about the pretty windows in the church, I reflected on how much had changed since that devastating November morning 2 years earlier. We'd lost the naive trust that had once defined our marriage, but we'd gained something more valuable, the tested trust that comes from choosing each other through difficulty. Patricia's attack on our family had been designed to destroy us, but it had ultimately made us unbreakable. We'd learned that real strength isn't about avoiding conflict, but about navigating it with grace, wisdom, and an unwavering commitment to protecting what matters most. Emma would never remember the baptism that had nearly torn our family apart, but she would grow up surrounded by the love, wisdom, and intentional commitment that had emerged from that crisis. In the end, Patricia's greatest failure had become our greatest success, proof that families built on tested love are stronger than families built on assumption alone. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.